The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long golden rays across the polished marble floors. Kate Middleton stood in her private sitting room, a delicate china teacup trembling slightly in her hands as she stared out at the perfectly manicured gardens. The Earl Grey tea had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but she hadn't noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts that had been consuming her for weeks. William had been away for nearly a month on official royal duties across Commonwealth nations. What was supposed to be a 2-week tour had extended into something much longer, with added stops and unexpected diplomatic meetings. The distance between them had grown with each passing day, not just physically, but emotionally. Their last phone conversation 3 days ago had been strained, filled with awkward pauses and unspoken tensions. Kate set down the teacup with shaking hands and walked to her writing desk. Scattered across its surface were drafts of letters she had started but never finished. Each one began the same way, "My dearest William," but the words that followed never seemed adequate to express the turmoil in her heart. How could she explain the growing emptiness she felt? How could she tell the future King of England that his wife was struggling with feelings she barely understood herself? The sound of her children's laughter echoed from the garden below, where George, Charlotte, and Louis played under the watchful eye of their nanny. Even their joy couldn't penetrate the cloud of melancholy that had settled over her. She loved being a mother, loved her family, but lately she felt like she was living someone else's life, playing a role that no longer fit. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Another message from her sister Pippa, asking if she wanted to meet for lunch. Kate had been avoiding social gatherings, making excuses to decline invitations that once would have delighted her. The truth was, she felt like a fraud. How could she smile and make small talk when her marriage felt like it was slowly unraveling? The palace staff moved quietly through the corridors, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets. Everyone was so careful around her, so respectful, but she longed for genuine human connection. Even her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, who had been with her for years, seemed to keep a professional distance that Kate found increasingly isolating. She picked up one of the unfinished letters and read her own words. "I know you're doing important work, and I'm proud of you, but sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing. Not as the Duchess of Cambridge, but as Kate, as the woman you fell in love with at university. Do you remember her? Sometimes I wonder if I do." The letter had been written in a moment of raw honesty 2 weeks ago, but she had never sent it. How could she burden William with her personal struggles when he was representing their country? How could she appear weak when the world expected her to be the perfect royal wife? Kate walked to her private bedroom and opened the wardrobe that contained hundreds of designer outfits, each one carefully selected for public appearances. She touched the fabric of a blue dress she had worn to a charity gala the month before William left. He had complimented her that night, said she looked radiant, but she had felt empty inside, going through the motions of being the woman everyone expected her to be. The memories of their early relationship flooded back. She remembered the cramped university flat they had shared, staying up all night talking about their dreams and fears. William had been different then, more relaxed, more himself. They would cook simple meals together, laugh at silly jokes, and dream about a future that seemed so much simpler than the reality they now lived. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through their text messages. The recent ones were brief, businesslike, "Arrived safely in Australia, event went well, miss you," were the playful messages they used to send. Whereas the intimacy they had once shared so effortlessly. Kate sat on the edge of their bed, the same bed where they had made love with such passion just a month ago, the night before William left. Even then, she had sensed something different about him, a distance that hadn't been there before. When she tried to talk to him about it, he had dismissed her concerns, saying he was just tired from preparing for the tour. The afternoon stretched endlessly ahead of her. She had no official engagement scheduled, no charity events or public appearances to distract her from her thoughts. The freedom that once would have been a luxury now felt like a burden. She wandered through the palace rooms, each one filled with priceless artifacts and reminders of centuries of royal history. Sometimes she felt like she was living in a museum, beautiful but lifeless. In the blue drawing room, she paused before a portrait of Queen Victoria, painted during a time when the monarch was said to be deeply in love with Prince Albert. Kate wondered if Victoria had ever felt this lost, this disconnected from the man she loved. The painted eyes seemed to understand, to offer a silent companionship across the centuries. Her personal secretary knocked softly on the door frame. "Your Royal Highness, I have tomorrow's schedule for your review." Kate nodded absently and accepted the papers, scanning the list of appointments and obligations that filled her days. A children's hospital visit, a meeting with the board of a mental health charity, a reception for visiting dignitaries. All worthy causes, all important work, but lately she felt like she was sleepwalking through her responsibilities. As evening approached, Kate found herself in the nursery, holding Louis while he napped. His small body was warm against her chest, and for a moment, the simple act of caring for her child brought her peace. This, at least, felt real and meaningful. Her love for her children was uncomplicated, pure in a way that her adult relationships had become tangled and difficult to navigate. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her school uniform slightly rumpled from an afternoon of play. "Mummy, when is Daddy coming home?" she asked with the directness that only children possess. Kate felt her heart tighten. She had been asking herself the same question, not just about when William would return, but about when the man she married would come back to her. "Soon, darling," Kate replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what that meant anymore. William's communications had become increasingly vague about his return date. There always seemed to be one more meeting, one more diplomatic dinner, one more reason to extend his stay. That night, Kate sat alone at the dining room table, picking at a meal prepared by the palace chef. The table was set for one, a sight that had become painfully familiar. She remembered dinners when they were first married, when they would talk and laugh together, planning their future and sharing their hopes. Now, even when William was home, their dinners often felt formal and distant. She tried calling him, calculating the time difference in her head. His phone went straight to voicemail, the sound of his recorded voice both comforting and heartbreaking. "It's me," she said after the beep. "I just wanted to hear your voice. I love you." She hung up, knowing she had said those same words in countless voicemails over the past month. Kate prepared for bed alone, following a routine that had become second nature. She applied her skincare products, brushed her hair, and slipped into a silk nightgown that William had once said made her look like an angel. Now it just made her feel more alone. She lay in their large bed, staring at William's empty pillow, and tried to remember the last time they had fallen asleep in each other's arms. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of walking through empty corridors, searching for something she couldn't name. She woke several times throughout the night, reaching across the bed for William before remembering he wasn't there. The darkness felt heavy and oppressive, filled with questions she was afraid to answer. The next morning brought more of the same routine. Kate went through the motions of her royal duties, smiling for cameras and making polite conversation with dignitaries and charity workers. Everyone commented on how wonderful she looked, how graceful she appeared, but inside she felt like she was slowly drowning. The weight of maintaining the perfect facade was becoming unbearable. During a quiet moment between appointments, Kate found herself in the palace library, surrounded by thousands of books that told the stories of other people's lives. She pulled down a volume of poetry and read verses about love and loss, finding comfort in words written by someone who had understood heartbreak. For the first time in days, she felt less alone. As she closed the book, Kate made a decision. When William returned, they would need to have an honest conversation about their marriage, about the distance that had grown between them, and about whether they could find their way back to each other. The thought terrified her, but she knew she couldn't continue living in this emotional limbo. She owed it to herself, to their children, and to their love story to fight for what they had once shared. The The palace felt different that day, charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. Kate didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew that whatever happened, she could no longer pretend that everything was perfect. Sometimes, she realized, the most courageous thing a person could do was admit they were struggling and ask for help, even when that person happened to be a member of the royal family. As the sun set over London, Kate stood once again at her window, watching the world outside continue its busy pace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to find her way back to herself and to the love she had once shared with William. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope that it might be possible to bridge the distance between them. She just had to find the courage to take the first step. 3 days later, Kate stood in the children's wing of St. Mary's Hospital, her practiced smile in place as she listened to Dr. Henderson explain the new pediatric treatment program. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile white glow that somehow matched her current state of mind. She nodded at appropriate moments, asked the questions that were expected of her, but her thoughts kept drifting to the conversation she planned to have with William when he finally came home. "Your Royal Highness, would you like to meet some of our young patients?" Dr. Henderson's voice pulled her back to the present. Kate's smile became genuine for the first time that day. Children had always been her refuge, their honesty and innocence a welcome break from the complicated world of adult relationships and royal protocols. In the colorful playroom, she sat cross-legged on the floor with 7-year-old Emma, who was recovering from surgery. Emma showed her a drawing she had made of her family, pointing to stick figures with crayons. "This is my mummy, and this is my daddy, and this is me," Emma explained with the simple joy that only children possessed. "They love each other very much, even when Daddy has to work late." Kate felt her chest tighten. Even a child could see what she had been struggling to understand about her own family. Love wasn't supposed to be this complicated, this fraught with unspoken tensions and growing silences. She helped Emma color in the sky of her drawing, adding puffy white clouds while wrestling with her own storm clouds of doubt. The hospital visit concluded with the usual photo opportunities and brief interviews with the press. Kate spoke about the importance of children's health care and the amazing work being done at the hospital. Her media training kicked in automatically, providing answers that were both meaningful and carefully neutral. No one could have guessed that behind her poised exterior, she was planning what might be the most important conversation of her married life. On the drive back to Kensington Palace, Kate's phone rang. William's name appeared on the screen, and her heart leaped before she reminded herself not to get too hopeful. Their recent conversations have been pleasant, but superficial, like talking to a polite stranger who happened to share her life. "Kate, darling," William's voice came through clearly, though there was still that subtle distance she had grown to dread. "How was the hospital visit?" "It went well," she replied, watching London pass by outside the car window. "The new wing is beautiful, and the staff is incredible. The children," she paused, thinking of Emma's simple drawing of a loving family. "The children were wonderful, as always." "I'm glad. Listen, I have some news." There was something different in William's tone, an undercurrent of energy that she hadn't heard in months. "I managed to wrap up things here earlier than expected. I'll be flying home tonight." Kate felt her pulse quicken, though she couldn't tell if it was from excitement or anxiety. "Tonight? That's wonderful. The children will be so excited." She paused, then added more quietly, "I've missed you." "I've missed you too," William replied, but the words felt automatic, like a reflex rather than a genuine expression of emotion. "I should land around 11. Don't wait up if you're tired." The casual way he said it stung more than Kate expected. "Don't wait up." As if his return after a month away was just another routine event, like coming home from a day at the office. She wanted to tell him that of course she would wait up, that she had been waiting for him to truly come home for much longer than just this past month. "I'll see you tonight," she said instead, keeping her voice steady. After they hung up, Kate stared at her phone, realizing that she felt more nervous about seeing her own husband than she did about any royal engagement or public appearance. When had that happened? When had the person who was supposed to be her closest companion become someone who made her feel uncertain and guarded? Back at the palace, Kate threw herself into preparations for William's return. She supervised the staff as they prepared his favorite meal, made sure his study was exactly as he liked it, and even put on the perfume he had given her for their last anniversary. As she moved through these familiar tasks, she tried to push down the voice in her head that whispered this felt more like preparing for a royal visit than welcoming home the man she loved. The children were beside themselves with excitement when she told them Daddy was coming home. George immediately began planning all the things he wanted to show his father, while Charlotte insisted on making a welcome home card decorated with hearts and rainbows. Louis, too young to fully understand the timeline, simply repeated, "Daddy home," with infectious joy. Their enthusiasm was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Kate realized that William's extended absence had affected them more than she had acknowledged. George had asked fewer and fewer questions about when Daddy would return, as if he was protecting himself from disappointment. Charlotte had become more clingy, needing extra bedtime stories and reassurance. Even Louis seemed to be looking for his father in every room they entered. As evening approached, Kate found herself changing clothes for the third time. Nothing felt right. The blue dress was too formal, the casual jeans and sweater too ordinary for their reunion, the black outfit too somber. Finally, she settled on a simple cream-colored dress that William had always liked, though she couldn't remember the last time he had commented on anything she wore. She helped put the children to bed, promising them they would see Daddy in the morning. Charlotte made her promise twice that he wouldn't leave again before she woke up, a request that broke Kate's heart. How many times had William's departures and absences created this kind of anxiety for their children? How many times had she made promises about his presence that circumstances beyond their control had forced her to break? The palace settled into its nighttime quiet, the kind of profound silence that only comes from being surrounded by centuries-old walls and the weight of history. Kate positioned herself in the blue drawing room, where she could see the courtyard where William's car would arrive. She tried to read, but the words blurred together on the page. She attempted to respond to emails, but couldn't concentrate long enough to compose coherent replies. At 10:30, she heard the distant sound of car doors closing. Her heart began to race as footsteps echoed in the marble hallway, growing closer with each passing second. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and tried to arrange her face into an expression of welcome that didn't reveal the complicated mixture of emotions churning inside her. William appeared in the doorway, and, for a moment, they simply looked at each other across the ornate room. He looked tired, older somehow than when he had left, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and long days. His suit was perfectly pressed, his hair immaculately styled, but there was something in his posture that seemed different, more guarded. "Hello, Kate," he said, his voice formal in a way that made the distance between them feel like an ocean rather than just a few feet of Persian carpet. "Welcome home," she replied, stepping toward him. They embraced, but it felt awkward and brief, like greeting a distant relative at a family function. Kate breathed in his familiar scent, hoping it would trigger the feelings of connection they had once shared. But instead, she felt like she was hugging a stranger who happened to look like her husband. "How was the flight?" she asked as they separated, falling back on the kind of small talk that felt safer than addressing the elephant in the room. "Long but productive. I managed to finalize the trade agreements we've been working on, and the cultural exchange program is moving forward as planned." William's response was thorough and informative, the kind of update he might give to a colleague or advisor rather than to his wife who had missed him terribly. Kate nodded and smiled, playing her part in this strange dance they seemed to be performing. "That's wonderful. Your work there was clearly appreciated." She gestured toward the sitting area. "Are you hungry? Chef prepared your favorite." "Actually, I ate on the plane. I think I'll just head up and get some sleep. It's been a rather long day." William's words were polite, but distant, as if he were a guest declining an invitation rather than a husband coming home to his family. Kate felt something inside her chest crack. She had waited a month for this moment, had spent countless hours planning what she would say and how they might reconnect, and he was treating it like any other ordinary evening. The careful plan she had made, the conversation she had rehearsed, all of it seemed suddenly ridiculous and presumptuous. "Of course," she managed to say, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You must be exhausted." They walked together toward the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. The silence between them felt heavy and charged with unspoken words. Kate wanted to reach out, to take his hand, to somehow bridge the gap that seemed to have widened rather than narrowed with his return. Instead, she kept her hands clasped in front of her, maintaining the proper distance that royal protocol demanded even in private moments. At the top of the stairs, they paused outside their bedroom door. This had once been their sanctuary, the place where they could be completely themselves without regard for titles or public expectations. Now it felt like entering a shared space between two polite strangers. "The children are excited to see you tomorrow," Kate said, desperate to fill the silence with something meaningful. "Charlotte made you a card, and George has about a dozen things he wants to show you." "I'm looking forward to it," William replied, but his tone suggested that seeing his children was just another item on his schedule rather than something he had been longing for during his absence. Kate watched him move through their bedroom, unpacking his suitcase with mechanical efficiency. He had always been organized, but there was something different about his movements now, something that suggested he was simply going through necessary motions rather than settling back into a space that felt like home. She prepared for bed in her dressing room, going through her nighttime routine while trying to process the disappointment that sat like a stone in her stomach. This wasn't how she had imagined his homecoming. She had pictured them talking until dawn, reconnecting over shared stories and intimate conversations. Instead, they were behaving like courteous roommates, careful not to intrude on each other's space. When she emerged from her dressing room, William was already in bed, reading official documents with the same focused attention he might give to matters of state. Kate slipped under the covers on her side of the bed, the familiar mattress feeling suddenly foreign and uncomfortable. "How are the children really doing?" William asked without looking up from his papers, as if this question had just occurred to him. Kate turned toward him, seeing this as an opening to something more substantial. "They missed you terribly. Charlotte has been asking almost every day when you were coming home, and Louis keeps looking for you in rooms where he used to find you. George has been so brave about it, but I can see it's affected him too." William nodded absently, making a note on one of his documents. "I'll make sure to spend quality time with them tomorrow." The phrase quality time stung Kate more than she expected. When had spending time with his own children become something that needed to be scheduled and planned rather than a natural part of their daily life? When had their family become a series of appointments and obligations rather than a source of joy and connection? She lay in the darkness beside him, listening to him turn pages and occasionally make notes. The man next to her was physically present, but emotionally absent, and Kate realized that his actual location had little to do with how far away he felt. He had been distant even before he left for his tour, and his return hadn't changed the fundamental disconnect that had grown between them. As William finally turned off his reading light and settled into sleep, Kate stared at the ceiling and acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. Their marriage was in trouble, and his homecoming had made that reality impossible to ignore. Tomorrow, she would need to find the courage to address what was happening between them, even if it meant having the difficult conversation she had been dreading. The alternative, continuing to live like polite strangers sharing a title and a bed, was no longer acceptable. The weight of that realization followed her into an uneasy sleep, where she dreamed of trying to reach someone who was always just beyond her grasp. Kate woke before dawn, her body tense, and her mind already racing despite the early hour. William slept beside her, his breathing deep and regular, completely unaware of the emotional storm building in his wife's heart. She studied his face in the pale morning light filtering through the heavy curtains, searching for traces of the young man she had fallen in love with at university. He was still handsome, still the same features she had memorized long ago, but there was something different about him now, even in sleep. The stress lines seemed deeper, the set of his jaw more rigid, as if even his subconscious was maintaining a formal distance from the world around him. Kate slipped quietly from the bed and padded to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the gardens below. The groundskeepers were already at work, maintaining the perfect landscape that surrounded their perfect life. Everything looked exactly as it should from the outside, just as their marriage appeared flawless to the millions of people who followed their every public appearance. The irony wasn't lost on her that she felt more alone now, with William physically present, than she had during the entire month of his absence. She dressed carefully for the day ahead, choosing clothes that made her feel confident and strong. If she was going to have the conversation that had been building in her mind for weeks, she would need every advantage she could gather. The navy blue dress she selected was one William had always complimented, back when he noticed such things. She applied her makeup with particular attention, not out of vanity, but as armor against the vulnerability she was about to expose. The breakfast room was filled with the children's excited chatter when she arrived. William was already there, having awakened early as he always did, reading the morning briefings while mechanically eating his usual breakfast of fresh fruit and toast. George was practically bouncing in his chair, eager to share every detail of what had happened during his father's absence. Charlotte had positioned herself as close to William as possible, as if physical proximity could prevent another long departure. "Daddy, you have to see the fort I built in the garden," George announced between bites of cereal. "It's got a drawbridge and everything. Mummy helped me with the engineering." William looked up from his papers with what Kate recognized as his practiced expression of parental interest. "That sounds impressive, George. I like to see it after breakfast." His tone was warm but somehow detached, as if he were speaking to the child of a diplomatic colleague rather than his own son. Charlotte pulled out the welcome home card she had made, its construction paper heart slightly crumpled from being carried around since yesterday. "I made this for you, Daddy. See? It says, 'Welcome home,' and I drew her whole family." She pointed to the stick figure drawings with intense pride. "It's beautiful, darling," William said, accepting the card and studying it with appropriate gravity. "I'll put it in my study where I can see it every day." But Kate noticed that his eyes didn't linger on the drawing the way they once would have, didn't find the same joy in their daughter's artistic expression that used to make him smile for hours. Kate watched these interactions with a growing sense of sadness. William was saying all the right things, performing the role of loving father with practiced competence, but something essential was missing. The spontaneous joy, the genuine connection that had once made their family feel magical. It had been replaced by something that looked right but felt hollow. After breakfast, William dutifully followed through on his promise to see George's fort, walking through the gardens while their son provided animated commentary on every aspect of the construction. Kate watched from the morning room window as they toured the elaborate structure George had spent weeks perfecting. Even from a distance, she could see the careful attention William was paying, the way he was asking appropriate questions and making encouraging comments. But his posture remained formal, his hands clasped behind his back in his familiar public appearance stance rather than relaxed and comfortable. Charlotte appeared beside Kate at the window, pressing her small face against the glass. "Mummy, is Daddy different now?" she asked with the startling directness that children possess. Kate felt her heart clench. If Charlotte, at her young age, could sense the change in William, then it was more significant than Kate had even realized. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "He feels farther away, even though he's right here," Charlotte said, her innocent observation cutting straight to the heart of what Kate had been struggling to articulate. "Like when you're thinking about something else while someone is talking to you." The accuracy of her daughter's perception was both impressive and heartbreaking. Kate knelt down to Charlotte's level. looking into eyes that reflected her own concerns. Sometimes grown-ups have things on their minds that make it hard to be completely present, even when they want to be, she explained gently. But that doesn't mean Daddy loves us any less. Charlotte nodded solemnly, then asked with devastating honesty, "Will he go away again, soon?" Kate didn't have a ready answer. The question hung in the air between them, highlighting the uncertainty that had become a constant presence in their family life. "I don't know, darling," she finally admitted. "But I hope not." Later that morning, William retreated to his study for a conference call with his private secretary about upcoming engagements. Kate could hear his voice through the heavy wooden door, discussing schedules and protocols with the same detached professionalism he had shown at breakfast. She realized that he had been in work mode since the moment he returned, never quite switching back to being simply William, husband and father. Kate spent the morning fulfilling her own obligations, reviewing correspondence from various charitable organizations, and preparing for upcoming events. But her mind kept wandering to the conversation she knew they needed to have. How did one approach a discussion about emotional distance with someone who seemed incapable of recognizing that distance existed? How did she tell the future king that she felt like she was losing herself in the role of perfect royal wife? Lunch was a formal affair, with the children present, but subdued, as if they too could sense the tension that Kate was struggling to hide. William discussed his upcoming schedule, mentioning several engagements that would require travel over the next few weeks. Each announcement felt like another small wound, proof that his pattern of constant departure and emotional unavailability wasn't going to change simply because she needed it to. There's also the possibility of another Commonwealth tour in the spring, William mentioned casually while cutting his salmon. The Foreign Office thinks it would be beneficial for ongoing trade relationships. Kate set down her fork carefully, fighting the urge to ask how long this tour might last, whether their marriage would survive another extended separation built on top of the foundation of distance that already existed between them. Instead, she simply nodded and made an appropriate comment about the importance of maintaining international relationships. That afternoon, while William spent time with Louis in the nursery, Kate found herself walking through the portrait gallery, studying the faces of previous royal wives who had navigated the complexities of marriage within the monarchy. Some looked serene and content. Others appeared resigned or melancholy. She wondered which expression her own portrait would eventually capture, whether future generations would see happiness or quiet desperation in her painted eyes. The afternoon stretched into evening with more of the same careful politeness between her and William. They moved around each other like experienced dancers, each knowing their steps and timing, but without any real connection or passion in the performance. They discussed practical matters, the children's schedules, upcoming events, household management, but never ventured into the territory of feelings or relationship concerns. Kate excused herself after dinner to put the children to bed, a responsibility that had become increasingly hers alone as William's travel schedule intensified. She read them stories and listened to their prayers, Charlotte once again asking God to help Daddy stay home longer this time. The simple faith in her daughter's voice made Kate's eyes burn with unshed tears. When she returned downstairs, she found William in his study again, surrounded by official papers and red dispatch boxes. The sight of him buried in work, even on his first full day back, crystallized something in Kate's mind. If she waited for the perfect moment to have this conversation, it would never come. There would always be another meeting, another tour, another reason to postpone addressing what was happening to their marriage. "William," she said from the doorway, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "We need to talk." He looked up from his papers, his expression politely inquiring, but somehow guarded, as if he could sense the seriousness in her tone. "Of course. What about?" Kate stepped into the study and closed the door behind her, a gesture that seemed to surprise him. "About us. About what's happening to our marriage." The words hung in the air between them, finally giving voice to the reality she had been avoiding for months. William's expression shifted from polite attention to something more alert and cautious, like a diplomat suddenly, realizing that a friendly conversation had become a formal negotiation. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said carefully, setting down his papers, but maintaining his position behind the massive mahogany desk that suddenly seemed like a barrier between them. Kate moved closer, choosing to sit in one of the leather chairs opposite his desk, rather than remaining standing like a supplicant. "I mean that we become strangers, William. Polite, courteous strangers who happen to share a life and children, but who no longer really see each other." William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a sign that her words had hit their target. "That seems rather dramatic, Kate. I know my travel schedule has been demanding lately, but that's the nature of my responsibilities. You've always understood that." "This isn't about your travel schedule," Kate said, fighting to keep her voice calm and reasonable. "This is about the fact that even when you're here, you're not really here. You're going through the motions of being a husband and father, but it feels like you're performing a role rather than living your life." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. William reached for his papers as if to resume working, a gesture that Kate recognized as his way of avoiding uncomfortable conversations. But she had come too far to let him retreat behind his walls of duty and protocol. "Please don't hide behind your work right now," she said softly. "I'm trying to save our marriage, and I need you to help me do that." William's hand stopped halfway to the papers. For the first time since his return, Kate saw something real flicker across his face, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of the gravity of what she was saying. The mask of royal composure slipped just enough for her to see the man she married, confused and uncertain beneath the layers of duty and expectation. "Save our marriage," he repeated, as if the words were foreign to him. "Kate, I think you're being overly dramatic. Yes, things have been challenging lately, but that's normal for people in our position. Every royal marriage faces these kinds of pressures." Kate leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not talking about pressure from outside, William. I'm talking about what's happening between us, personally. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling, really feeling, and waited to hear the answer?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. Kate watched as he tried to formulate a response, seeing him struggle to remember moments of genuine intimacy that had once come so naturally to them both. The fact that he had to think about it at all proved her point more effectively than any argument she could have made. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece, marking the seconds as they sat across from each other, separated by more than just the expanse of polished wood between them. Kate realized that this conversation was either the beginning of finding their way back to each other or the moment when they would finally acknowledge how far apart they had drifted. Either way, there was no going back to pretending everything was fine. William sat back in his chair, his fingers drumming silently on the leather armrest as he processed Kate's words. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken frustrations and gradual disconnection. Kate watched his face carefully, seeing the internal struggle as he wrestled with admitting to problems he had either ignored or genuinely failed to recognize. "I suppose," he said slowly, his voice softer than it had been since his return, "I've been operating on the assumption that if we were fulfilling our duties and the children were happy, everything else would sort itself out." He paused, meeting her eyes for the first time in their conversation. "I can see now that was naive." Kate felt a flicker of hope at this acknowledgement, but she didn't let herself get carried away. One moment of honest recognition didn't undo months of growing apart, but it was a start. "When did we stop talking to each other, really talking?" she asked. "When did we become so careful around each other?" William stood up from behind the desk and moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in the familiar pose she had seen him adopt countless times during difficult conversations. "I think," he said quietly, "it started when I began to feel like I was failing at everything that mattered. The weight of expectations, the constant scrutiny, the knowledge that every decision I make affects not just us, but the entire institution." He trailed off, his voice carrying a vulnerability that Kate hadn't heard in years. "So you pulled away," Kate said, not as an accusation, but as an observation. "You became more formal, more distant, because it felt safer than risking failure in our personal relationship, too." William turned from the window, his eyes reflecting a pain that he had clearly been carrying alone. "I didn't want to burden you with my doubts and insecurities. You're so good at this, Kate. You handle every public appearance, every charity engagement, every crisis with such grace. I thought if I could just be strong enough, professional enough, I could shield you from the parts of this life that were wearing me down." Kate stood and moved toward him, closing some of the physical distance between them. "But by trying to protect me, you shut me out completely. I'm your wife, William. I signed up for all of it, the good parts and the difficult ones. When you hide your struggles from me, you're not protecting me, you're isolating both of us." The words hung in the air between them, and Kate saw something shift in William's expression. The careful mask he had been wearing since his return began to crack, revealing the exhausted and overwhelmed man beneath. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they surprised Kate. "I'm terrified that I'm not good enough for this role, that I'm letting everyone down, including you and the children." Kate felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief that the man she married was still there, still capable of honest vulnerability. "You're not letting us down by being human, William. You're letting us down by pretending to be something you're not, even with us." William sank into one of the leather chairs, his formal posture finally relaxing into something more natural. "I used to tell you everything," he said, his voice filled with regret. "Remember those nights at university when we would stay up until dawn just talking about anything and everything? When did I stop trusting you with my thoughts?" "I think you stopped trusting yourself," Kate said gently, sitting in the chair beside him rather than across from him. "And when you lose trust in yourself, it becomes impossible to be open with anyone else, even the people who love you most." They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of their conversation. Kate could feel something fundamental shifting between them, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. It wasn't a magical instant healing. Years of accumulated distance couldn't be undone in a single conversation, but it was the beginning of finding their way back to each other. "The children have noticed," Kate said softly. "Charlotte asked me today if you were different now. She said you felt farther away, even when you were right here." William's face crumpled at this information, the careful control he maintained finally, breaking under the weight of realizing how his emotional distance had affected their children. "God, Kate, what have I done? I never wanted them to feel." He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "They love you," Kate assured him quickly. "That's not in question. But they need their father to be present with them, not just physically, but emotionally. And so do I." William reached for her hand, the first genuinely spontaneous gesture he had made since coming home. His fingers were warm and familiar, and Kate felt a rush of recognition at the simple touch. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had been hiding behind layers of duty and self-protection. "I don't know how to find my way back," he admitted. "I've been playing this role for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to just be myself anymore." Kate squeezed his hand gently. "We'll figure it out together. But it has to be together, William. I can't do this alone anymore. And you shouldn't have to carry everything by yourself either." William looked at her with something approaching wonder, as if he had forgotten that partnership was possible. "I've been so focused on not failing publicly that I lost sight of the fact that I was failing privately in the ways that matter most." "You haven't failed," Kate said firmly. "We've lost our way, but that's not the same thing as failing. People lose their way all the time, especially when they're under the kind of pressure we face every day. What matters is that we're both willing to admit it and work to find each other again." They talked until well past midnight, tentatively exploring the territory they had been avoiding for months. William shared his fears about living up to his father's legacy, his anxiety about making decisions that would affect the monarchy for generations to come, and his growing sense that he was losing himself in the role he was born to play. Kate talked about her loneliness, her feeling that she was disappearing into the perfect image everyone expected her to maintain, and her fear that they had become more focused on appearing to be a happy couple than actually being one. It wasn't an easy conversation, and there were moments when old patterns of defensiveness and withdrawal threatened to reassert themselves. But they pushed through the discomfort, both recognizing that this level of honesty was essential if they wanted to rebuild what they had lost. "I want to reduce my travel schedule," William said as they prepared to finally go to bed. "Not eliminate it. I understand my responsibilities, but find a better balance. The Commonwealth tour in the spring, maybe we should go together this time. Make it a family affair where possible." Kate felt another spark of hope. The children would love that. And so would I. She paused, then added, "But more than that, I want us to start having these conversations regularly before problems build up to this level. I want us to check in with each other, really check in, not just about schedules and obligations, but about how we're doing as people." William nodded, understanding the significance of what she was suggesting. Weekly conversations. Just us, no distractions, no work. A time that's protected for our relationship. As they climbed the stairs together, Kate felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. They weren't magically fixed. Rebuilding trust and intimacy would take time and consistent effort, but they had taken the first crucial step of acknowledging the problem and committing to work on it together. In their bedroom, the familiar space felt different somehow, less like a shared but separate territory and more like a genuine sanctuary for their relationship. As they prepared for bed, their movements were less careful, more natural, as if the conversation had given them permission to drop some of the formality that had crept into even their most private moments. "Kate," William said as they settled into bed, "I'm sorry for pulling away, for making you feel alone, for forgetting what we promised each other when we got married." Kate turned to face him in the darkness, able to see his face in the soft light filtering through the curtains. "I'm sorry, too, for letting it go on so long without saying anything, for being afraid to rock the boat when I should have been fighting for our marriage." William reached for her, pulling her closer to him in a way that felt both familiar and new. Kate settled against his chest, hearing the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and feeling, for the first time in months, like she was truly home. "It's going to take work," William murmured into her hair. "Learning how to be myself again, how to be present for you and the children. I may need help. We'll get whatever help we need," Kate replied. "Counseling, time away together, whatever it takes. We didn't come this far to give up now." They held each other in the quiet darkness, both understanding that they had reached a turning point. The months of distance and careful politeness hadn't been erased, but they had finally named the problem and committed to solving it together. It would require changing deeply ingrained patterns of behavior, learning new ways of communicating, and consistently choosing vulnerability over the safer option of emotional distance. The next morning brought a subtle but noticeable change in the household's atmosphere. William joined the family for breakfast without his usual pile of briefings, focusing entirely on the children's excited chatter about their plans for the day. Kate watched as he listened to George's detailed explanation of a new cricket technique with genuine attention, and how he responded to Charlotte's request for help with her art project by immediately setting aside his phone to give her his full focus. "Daddy," Charlotte said as he helped her mix colors for her painting, "you seem more like yourself today." William paused in his stirring of the blue paint, meeting Kate's eyes across the breakfast table. "I'm trying to be, sweetheart," he replied honestly. "Sometimes grown-ups forget how to be themselves, and they need reminders from the people they love most." Kate felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were tears of hope rather than despair. The conversation they'd had the night before had been just a beginning, but it was a beginning that felt solid and real. They had a long way to go to fully repair the damage that months of emotional distance had caused, but they were finally moving in the right direction. As the morning progressed, Kate noticed dozens of small changes in William's behavior. He asked her opinion about his schedule and actually waited for her answer. He sat on the floor to play with Lewis instead of watching from a chair. He complimented her appearance without prompting and seemed to really see her when he said it. Most importantly, when his private secretary called with an urgent matter that could have easily waited until Monday, William politely, but firmly said he would address it later, choosing to continue reading to Charlotte instead of jumping immediately into work mode. Kate realized that healing their marriage wouldn't require grand gestures or dramatic changes. It would happen through exactly these kinds of small, consistent choices to prioritize their relationship and family over the endless demands of duty and protocol. It would require both of them to remain vigilant against the tendency to retreat into roles and responsibilities when connection became challenging or inconvenient. That evening, as they put the children to bed together for the first time in months, Kate felt a sense of partnership that had been missing for far too long. They moved as a team again, sharing the tasks and responsibilities of parenting rather than operating as polite strangers sharing a household. Later, as they sat together in their private sitting room, William reading actual books instead of official documents while Kate worked on correspondence, the atmosphere was comfortable in a way it hadn't been in ages. They weren't forcing conversation or struggling to fill awkward silences. They were simply existing together in the same space, each engaged in their own activities, but connected by their renewed commitment to being present for each other. "Thank you," William said suddenly, looking up from his book. "For what?" Kate asked, though she thought she knew what he meant. "For not giving up on us. For being brave enough to say what needed to be said. For fighting for our marriage when I had forgotten that it was worth fighting for." Kate set aside her letters and moved to sit beside him on the sofa, curling up against his side in a gesture that felt both natural and precious. "We're worth fighting for," she said simply. "All of us, you, me, the children, the life we're building together. It's worth whatever effort it takes to get it right." William kissed the top of her head, a soft gesture that conveyed more affection than all the formal politeness they had exchanged in recent months. "I love you, Kate. I never stopped loving you, even when I lost track of how to show it." "I love you too," she replied, meaning it in a way that felt both familiar and renewed. "And I believe in us, in what we can be when we remember to choose each other every day." As they sat together in the lamplight, Kate felt the cautious optimism of the previous day solidifying into something stronger and more certain. They weren't naive enough to think that one conversation had solved all their problems, but they had rediscovered something essential. They were partners, allies in building a life together rather than strangers sharing obligations. The work of rebuilding their intimacy and trust would continue, requiring daily choices to be vulnerable, to communicate honestly, and to prioritize their relationship even when duty and protocol demanded otherwise. But they were committed to that work now, both understanding that their marriage was not just a personal matter, but the foundation upon which their entire family and their ability to serve their country effectively depended. Outside the palace walls, the world continued its relentless pace, unaware that a future king and queen had just taken the first steps toward reclaiming not just their marriage but their essential selves. Inside, two people who had almost lost each other held on tight, determined to write a different ending to their love story than the one that had seemed inevitable just days before.